The lodge's main hall seemed colder than usual, the heavy wood-paneled walls leaching warmth despite the crackling fire in the hearth. Ava stood just outside the doors, her sharp senses attuned to the hushed voices within. The council was already gathered, their conversation low and urgent, but the faint whispers that carried through the door made her pause. "She's losing control," a male voice said, tight with worry. "Maybe it's not control she's losing," a sharper voice replied. "Maybe it's her judgment." Ever since the child, Ava's wolf stirred uneasily, a low growl rumbling in the back of her mind. She tightened her hands into fists, her nails pressing against her palms until the sting grounded her. She couldn't afford anger not here, not now. The whispers cut off abruptly as she pushed open the doors. The room fell silent, the council members turning toward her, as if they hadn't just been discussing her ability to lead. Ava's gaze swept over them, reading the tension in their stiff postures and the guarded looks they exchanged. "Let's begin," she said, her voice calm but firm as she strode to the head of the table. She didn't sit. Standing let her command their attention and set the tone. The firelight flickered against the faces of the gathered council. Nathan, his expression as grim as ever, Marcus already scowling, and Elder Miriam sat as still as stone, her lined face betraying nothing. Ava's heart tightened briefly at the sight of them. This was her pack, her responsibility, and now her greatest challenge. The early part of the meeting dragged with routine updates, patrol schedules, the strengthening of the southern perimeter, an inventory of dwindling food supplies. But the undercurrent of unease was palpable. Eva could feel it in the way Marcus shifted in his seat, the way Nathan's jaw tensed when the child was mentioned in passing. It didn't take long for the conversation to pivot to the real issue. "We need to talk about the child," Marcus said, his voice cutting through the room like a blade. The murmurs began immediately, low and filled with uncertainty. Eva didn't move, her posture remaining steady even as her wolf bristled. "They're not a threat," she said, her tone measured but firm. "Not yet," Marcus countered, leaning forward, his hand splayed on the table. "But what happens when they are? What happens when their powers grow beyond our control? Are we just supposed to wait until the prophecy fulfills itself, until we the ones paying the price for it?" Ava's hands tightened into fists behind her back. "The prophecy doesn't dictate who the child will become. They're one of us, Marcus, and they deserve the same protection as any other member of this pack." "Protection is one thing," Marcus snapped. "Blind loyalty is another. You're putting us all at risk." "That's enough," Nathan interjected, his voice low but commanding. "We've all seen what the child is capable of. Yes, it's unsettling, but they're also just a child, and this pack is responsible for guiding them. We don't abandon our own." Marcus let out a derisive snort, spoken like someone who hasn't seen what power like that can do when it is unchecked. Ava stepped forward, her presence silencing the room, her gaze fixed on Marcus, her voice steady and cutting. "If you think undermining me helps the pack, you're mistaken. The rogues are our enemy, not each other. And if you can't focus on that, then maybe you're the one who doesn't belong here." The room fell into a charged silence. Marcus leaned back in his chair, his expression stormy but subdued. Elder Miriam's voice cut through the quiet, soft but unyielding. "A divided pack is a vulnerable one. We've survived this long because we've stood together, not apart. Let's not forget that." Ava inclined her head toward Miriam in quiet gratitude. But the reprieve didn't last long. After the meeting dispersed, Ava stayed behind, leaning against the edge of the table as she let out a slow, measured breath. Nathan remained as well, his arms crossed over his broad chest. "You handled that better than I would have," he said gruffly. Ava raised an eyebrow. "You mean you wouldn't have threatened Marcus with exile?" Nathan smirked faintly.
"No.
"I would have punched him and then exiled him." Ava shook her head, a small smile tugging at her lips, despite the tension lingering in her chest. "He's not wrong to be afraid," she admitted after a pause. "The prophecy, the child's powers, ... it scares me too." Nathan's expression softened, though his voice remained steady. "Fear is natural, Ava, but you've done more for this pack than anyone else could have. Don't let his doubts undermine that." Ava nodded, though the weight of the day still pressed heavily against her shoulders. "Thanks, Nathan." Before he could respond, Ryan appeared in the doorway, his expression unusually tense. "Something's wrong," he said, his voice quiet but urgent. "The Southern Patrol hasn't returned, and we've picked up rogue scents near the outer perimeter." Ava's wolf surged forward, her senses sharpening. "Close," Ryan replied. "Too close." By the time they reached the southern perimeter, the air was thick with tension. Ava's sharp eyes scanned the tree line, her wolf alert and ready. "They were here," Nathan said, crouching near a cluster of disturbed tracks. "But they're not anymore." "That doesn't mean they're gone," Ava muttered, her grip tightening on the hilt of her blade. Ryan stood a few feet away, his bow drawn and ready. "We need to get back," he said. If this was a distraction, they could already be at the stronghold. Ava's heart lurched at the thought, her gaze snapping toward the distant glow of the lodge. The group moved swiftly but cautiously, their senses on high alert as they retraced their steps. The scent of rogues lingered faintly in the air, but it was dissipating, as though whatever threat had been present was already retreating. When they reached the lodge, Ava's wolf settled slightly, though the tension in her chest remained. The child was safe, for now. That night, as the pack settled into an uneasy calm, Ava stood on the balcony overlooking the grounds. The cold air bit at her cheeks, but she barely noticed. Her mind churned with the weight of the Daymarcus's accusations, the lingering scent of rogues, the ever-present shadow of the prophecy. A distant howl broke through the stillness, low and mournful, sending a shiver down her spine.